Welcome to the lab. This is the Big Scientist channel where we explore the why so you know how. Today, we are diving into the why behind sweet, nutty, chewy, and tender, flourless peanut butter cookies. So stay tuned, make sure to subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay up to date on all the delicious science. Now let's get into it. Peanut butter cookies are a delicious classic that can be made flourless, which also means they are full of science. Now, to start, we're going to go ahead and dive into some science. So typically when you're making cookies or cakes or anything like that, you want to cream your fat, which is usually a butter, with your sugar. And in this case, because we're actually not using any actual dairy butter, we're using peanut butter, we're going to cream our sugar with the peanut butter. And if you've seen our caramel cake video, you will know the purpose of creaming. So the purpose of creaming is to aerate your dough, and so the sugar will actually poke little holes in the butter, the fats of the butter, and this creates air pockets, which can be used to help make a lighter, airier end product. So instead of a dense kind of flat cookie or cake, by aerating the butter in the beginning, you're allowing those extra air pockets to come in, because when we're making cookies and cakes, we don't use yeast, which would provide that air, the carbon dioxide, which will fill those air pockets and stretch out the gluten that you develop in breads and will give you that lift. In cookies and cakes, we don't have yeast, so what we're using is the air from what we're whipping into our dough. So for our peanut butter cookies, because we're not using dairy, we're using peanut butter, and peanut butter actually is very high in fat. So it kind of works in this recipe in place of actual dairy butter. The fats in this are being aerated with the sugar, the brown sugar. We're whipping it together and we're creating a lighter dough so that we can get that air in there, so that it's not a flat cookie, we get a little bit of rise to our cookie. We're helping it along by giving it those air pockets and making it kind of creating the crumb, really. And again, this is similar to what we did in our caramel cake video. If you haven't seen that, please check it out. Caramel cake is chock full of science, so it's pretty interesting. But for here, we're just going to cream our butter, our peanut butter, and our brown sugar together. And once it becomes a nice kind of creamy, lighter texture, we're going to move on to adding in our next few ingredients. Sufficiently creamed the butter and the sugar, we're going to go ahead and start adding our next set of ingredients. So here we're going to add our baking soda, our cornstarch, our salt, our vanilla, and an egg. And the egg is actually the star of this cookie recipe. Because this is a flourless cookie recipe, and I mean flourless in the sense we're not adding any kind of flour, we're not adding oat flour, almond flour, anything, no flour at all, nothing with flour proteins. Because this is flourless, completely flourless, we need some kind of binding agent, something to bind this together to make it a cohesive dough to form a cookie. And the egg is the star of that. So if you haven't already, please check out our scrambled egg video, and you will see the science behind an egg and what an egg does. But here we're gonna go into a little bit of detail on what the egg is doing for our peanut butter cookies. So eggs are made up of all types of proteins, and the proteins in eggs can help emulsify things, which means that they hold things together. They hold unlike things into a solution, in a like solution. So an emulsifier, in a sense, will take water and oil and pull them together and hold them in a way that they can interact with each other and not separate. And because peanut butter is a fat, it's butter, and our liquid from the egg, there's water in egg, so the water from the egg would technically be separating. And we also don't have flour to bind our ingredients together to kind of make it a dough. So that's where the egg comes in. The egg is actually going to hold together the the fats and the water and help form a dough. And when an egg is cooked, it forms a protein, like a mesh web. The proteins denature and they rearrange in a way where it's like a mesh web where it's very interconnected and it's very strong. And that mesh web when baked properly, will give us a nice solid kind of foundation for the cookie. It acts in the place of how flour would bake into like a structure. The egg bakes into that structure to give the cookie structure, to give the cookie a shape. So that's what the egg is going to be doing in this recipe. And we're also adding baking soda, which if you've seen our chocolate chip cookie video, you will see the science behind baking soda. So the baking soda is acting as a leavening agent, which means it will add a little bit more lift. So we did aerate the dough earlier and added a little bit of air pockets in there into the butter. But we also need some more lift because this cookie doesn't have yeast, like I was mentioning. We need to make sure we get enough lift where it's actually going to be a cookie and not just a flat thing. So the baking soda is adding to that. And what the baking soda is doing, it's interacting with the acid in the brown sugar. So brown sugar is made up of molasses and sugar, white sugar, and the molasses actually has vinegar in it. And that vinegar is an acid which will react with the baking soda, and that reaction creates carbon dioxide bubbles, which will give the cookie a little bit more lift with the bubbles during that reaction. And then we're also adding cornstarch into this. Now, cornstarch is a very versatile ingredient in the kitchen, and if you've seen our cornstarch video, you will understand all the different ways that it can be used. And for this recipe, we're actually using it to retain moisture, because again, we don't have any kind of flour or anything that gelatinizes to hold in any moisture. We're going to go ahead and use cornstarch for that gelatinization. So what we're doing, we introduce the cornstarch in, and like I mentioned, egg is mostly proteins and water. So the water from the egg is really all that the moisture we're getting for this cookie. And in order to make sure this cookie is not going to crumble and be brittle, we want to make sure we're retaining some of that moisture. So by adding the cornstarch, we're allowing it to absorb some of that moisture, gelatinize, and hold on to it. So as it bakes, it's going to retain the moisture and give the cookie a lot more chew and a lot more moisture, so it's softer and not just a crumbly mess. So now that the dough has finally come together, we can go ahead and start shaping these cookies into balls and get them onto our baking sheet to start baking. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a tablespoon to measure out my cookies. So I do a tablespoon scoops. You can do smaller ones or bigger ones if you want. I decided to do tablespoon scoops here. So do one tablespoon per cookie, and then I take it out and roll it between my hands to create a ball and just set it on the cookie tray. So now that we have all of our cookie balls together, we're going to go ahead and do a small experiment. So peanut butter cookies don't typically spread as well as other cookies. So what people usually do is they take a fork and they do a crisscross pattern to smash it down a little bit, and also gives it its distinct characteristic look. And so I decided to do just a few of these with the crisscross pattern and then let some of them sit just to see really how much they will spread. See if it's really necessary to do the crisscross with the fork. And don't mind the other set of cookies on here. I was doing a little bit of an experiment with some Nutella, which didn't turn out very well, but we'll go into that in another video. Now I'm going to put these cookies into a preheated 350-degree oven for about 10 minutes. And after 10 minutes, you can see they come out. They look pretty good. What you want to do though, because these are flourless, we're going to let them sit on the tray for at least 5 minutes before we remove them to a cooling rack to cool completely. And here you have it, the final result. Delicious, buttery, nutty peanut butter cookies. And here I'm showing you one cookie that I did the crisscross pattern on and one that I left just a ball. As you can see, it's not a big difference between the spread of the two. They still look pretty good either way. So I say It's not necessary for the crisscross, but if that's what you like to do, because that is the classic look, then go for it. They taste delicious. They taste the same. One just spread a tiny teensy bit more than the other, but they're delicious either way. So as you can see, when we break it open, the crumb is nice and tender. It still has a chew to it. It holds together, and that's all due to the eggs, the baking soda, the cornstarch, the creaming of the sugars, the butter, all the science that went into it. So until next time, happy baking.